In 1968, an independent low-budget film made in Evans City, Pennsylvania, revolutionized the horror genre. But some film distributors wanted no part of its shocking depiction of reanimated dead people eating the flesh of their victims. Pittsburgh filmmaker George Romero's vision of a slow, shuffling, flesh-eating automaton, technically a ghoul, but usually referred to as a zombie today, is considered an archetype that continues to spawn numerous imitations all over the world. The first scene in Night of the Living Dead, filmed in the Evans City Cemetery, inspires terror of a relatable kind. After brother and sister visit their father's grave, a playfully imagined attack becomes reality. Shots from the scene can be easily lined up with the same gravestones that exist today.
Hi, my name is Lawrence D. Vincent. I am a George Romero film historian, and we are now in the Evans City Cemetery in Evans City, Pennsylvania, where they filmed the original Night of the Living Dead. I am standing in front of the chapel in the cemetery, and I'm going to give you a tour of the filming locations from Night of the Living Dead.
There's nothing wrong with the radio. Must have been the station.
Which row is it in?
Johnny and Barbara come walking through the cemetery in several shots.
Well, there's no one around.
But in the last one leading up to their father's gravesite, they come directly through here. Johnny comes, kneels before the gravestone, which is where their father would have been here. He places a cross here. And he's like, I wonder how many times we bought the same cross.
Each year we spend good money on these things. We come out here and the one from last year's gone.
Well, the flowers die, and the caretaker or somebody takes them away.
Yeah, a little spit and polish, you can clean this up. Sell it next year. Wonder how many times we bought the same one. Hey, come on, Barb. Church was this morning, huh?
The first time you see the cemetery zombie in the movie, there is this distant shot of him, and he's actually walking right about here, or more like shambling through the cemetery. You might not see them, but maybe he does.
Do you remember one time when we were small, we were out here? It was from right over there. I jumped out at you from behind the tree, and Grandpa got all excited, and he shook his fist at me, and he said, "Boy, you be damned to hell." Remember that? Right over there. Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny.
Hey, you're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it. You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
He'll hear you.
Here he comes now. I'm getting out of here.
Johnny. Oh! No! No! Johnny! Help me!
So as Johnny wrestles with the cemetery zombie, his sister Barbara cowers by this very gravestone here, the Nicholas Kramer stone. So the cemetery zombie is hovering over Johnny, who is right here, possibly dead. He sees Barbara ahead of him, and he looks at her as he leans over the body. And then he goes up and after her. So the cemetery zombie is chasing Barbara through the cemetery towards her car where she's running. And you see a shot of him rustling through the bushes and trees. And beside him you can see this coal stone here in the shot. So of course, Barbara is being chased through the cemetery, and she runs along this path here, and she trips and falls. Cemetery zombie shambles down by the car where Barbara's inside of it, and he's banging on the window. Trying to get in the car. She's inside and she doesn't have keys for the car. He runs around the side. The cemetery zombie reaches down, picks up a rock, and he comes over to the window, smash, smash, and then smash all the way through. Of course, the rock went into the car and it almost hit the cameraman, who was George Romero himself. So the cemetery zombie claws at the car as Barbara takes off, and he follows her down the path. So the cemetery zombie follows Barbara in her car down the hill. And you would think the next shot would be down the hill, but it's not. It's actually over here. And he actually runs down this path here, and the car stops right about here where there used to be a tree, and it's where it crashes.
The passage of time has enhanced the appeal of Night of the Living Dead. Cast members and fans gathered in Evans City to celebrate the film's influence on popular culture.
Living Dead Weekend, Evans City 2023. Action.
We are here to celebrate Night of the Living Dead. It is the movie that started the zombie genre. And that's only one reason why it's important, because it's also an independent film that broke through all kinds of barriers and became like a big film. It's a Pittsburgh film. It's an Evans City film. Evans City is my hometown. Evans City Cemetery is my home cemetery. So I had this lifelong mission to tell the world, hey, Evans City, Pittsburgh, let's be proud that something this important was started here, And that's why I started doing these festivals, which grew into this convention, which is basically to celebrate that and the local pride of being like the beginning of something that's turned into something that was never envisioned by the filmmakers. They weren't trying to create a new horror movie genre that video games and cartoons and movies and TV shows would be playing off of for 55 years. They were just making a film that people wanted to see, that would be fun film. And along the way, the world turned that into a zombie genre. They weren't even called zombies, and it just played out and happened over several years. It wasn't even like something that they were talking about in the script, because that word meant a different sort of thing at that time. It meant that voodoo, mind control. We have pretty much all of the remaining cast that's still alive today.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
We have Russ Striner, who's the producer and star of the film. Judith O'Day. Judy's the lead, and the other lead is unfortunately he passed away. But we have also Judy Ridley, who was one of the major characters in the film. We have Kyra Schoen, who's the little girl ghouls that people called zombie.
George Romero came to Pittsburgh when we were 18 years old. Russ Striner and George and I were the same age, 18. I was at West Virginia University, Russ was at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, and George came here from New York because he enrolled at Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon, as a fine arts major. We're both fine arts majors, and when we're supposed to be drawing the naked girl, George is drawing scenes from Ben-Hur. And he said he wants to paint scenes from Spartacus on my bedroom walls, and my mother's going to let him do it. So I came home, and Rudy had a '55 Plymouth convertible. We jumped in a car and went to George's apartment in Oakland. Rudy honked a horn, and George came down to the street, and he was wearing a big sombrero, 2 bandoleros of ammunition, 2 pistolas, and a big droopy black mustache. And of course, we didn't remark on that at all because we're way too cool to notice. So George jumped in the car, and we went to get Dairy Queen ice cream, and the girl took one look at him and slammed the window shut and wouldn't wait on us. So we just laughed and kept going. And the reason he was wearing the sombrero and all that was his favorite movie, one of his favorite movies was Viva Zapata. And that was about Emilio Zapata, who, along with Pancho Villa, they were the 2 top Mexican revolutionaries, and the Viva Zapata starred Marlon Brando as Zapata. George and I were the 2 writers in our company. We only had 5 people in the company. I suggested we ought to make a horror film because we bought a 35mm camera, and I said we ought to be able to, maybe if we and 5 of our friends, we'd have 10 people. If we each kicked in $600, we'd have 6,000. Maybe we could shoot some cheap horror film. George went away just before Christmas. He didn't show up at the office for a few days and came back, and he had 20 or 30 pages of a short story that had a brother and sister visiting their father's grave, which was also my idea. I said, whatever we do ought to start in a cemetery, because cemeteries are spooky to people. So he had this thing where the girl gets attacked, and then people are chasing her. And I said, and he quit writing after about 30 pages. And I said, well, George, this has all the right twists and turns and suspense, but who's chasing this girl? You never say. And he said, I don't know. Well, I said, well, I think they could be dead people. He said, that's good. And I said, but what are they after? You don't say that either. And he said, I don't know. And I said, why don't we use my flesh-eating idea?
I was involved 55 years ago in a movie called Night of the Living Dead. There are about 7 people in the world who have not seen or heard of Night of the Living Dead. But for those who haven't, I played kind of an annoying older brother to a young woman. We're out to visit a grave site, and things don't go well. And the brother is quite tormenting to his younger sister, and before you know it, what starts off as an ordinary visit to a cemetery turns very, very bad for both of them, especially the character of Johnny, which is the character that I play. A director by the name of George Romero, who was struggling to get his career off the ground. I was struggling to get my acting career off the ground, met through a mutual friend. Our relationship kind of turned into Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, how about if you bring the costumes and I'll write the songs and we'll eventually make a movie. That's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's basically how it happened. George and I ended up being business partners and friends for 60 years. And along that pathway, in 1967, we filmed Night of the Living Dead. He directed it, he co-wrote it with John Russo, and I co-produced it with Carl Hardman, one of the other people who plays a character in the film. And what was one of the things that was unique about it, it was filmed in Pittsburgh. It had never, Pittsburgh had never been host to a movie before. We put our hand in the air and said, we'll make a movie here. We did. We self-financed it, so we didn't have any studio people looking over our shoulder saying, you can do this and stay away from that. So we kind of made the movie that we wanted to. There were 10 of us. The company that owns Night of the Living Dead is called Image 10. There were 10 investors who each put up the princely sum of $600. So we started with $6,000. And the lesson to be learned from that for young filmmakers is, if you think you have a good idea and if you can cobble together a little bit of money, make sure you finish your project. Because if we hadn't finished Night of the Living Dead, 55 years later, I'd be at home doing yard work. I had to come to grips with, as an actor, that Johnny was basically a jerk. and tormenting was his game. He says a rather memorable line in the film, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." That has gone down as a line in movie history. I don't know why, I can't explain why, but I think it was the combination of the jerk Johnny tormenting his sister and the line delivery that it's become a part of movie history.
It might be a bigger line than Clark Gable's, frankly, my dear. I don't give a damn.
I was living in California at the time, in LA. I wanted very much to be in film. I got a call from Carl Hardman, who plays Harry Cooper in the film. He and I had worked together, off and on for many years. He had a recording studio, Hardman Associates, doing television, radio, audio commercials. I did a lot of them. He said, would you like to come back and audition? We're going to make a film. George, Russ, Jack. I said, I'm in. I auditioned. I think I must have found out shortly after that he very kindly had given me the role of Barbara. But it just happened. And to go out to Hollywood, to make it big in film, and to make your big film back in Pittsburgh, I think that's rather ironic. Cemeteries always frightened me as a kid. My mother told me a wonderful story about her and the cemetery that I'd never forgotten. Interestingly, I was thrilled just to be on set, but what was even more exciting, when I came back to the cemetery after being away for those decades, after the film had come out and it was doing well, to go back to the cemetery was surreal. I felt if I pushed the air just a little bit harder, that I could pop right back to where I was in 1967. George gave us tremendous freedom. He told us what he wanted to achieve in the scene, and then gave us the freedom to achieve it, which, as a young actor, you know, that's a gift. George said, throw in a comment about the candy.
You know, I figure we're either going to have to move Mother out here or move the grave into Pittsburgh.
She can't make a trip like this.
Oh, you know that she can't. Is there any of that candy left?
No.
Look at this thing. We still remember. I don't. You know, I don't even remember what the man looks like.
Tell him about driving from Pittsburgh. He just gave Bear, the dialogue was all improvisation. Barbara, to many people over the years with whom I've spoken, have thought Barbara to be a weak character. I do not find Barbara to be weak at all. I think she has tremendous strength. I think her behavior, once she got to the house and had to process what she had just seen, is a very intelligent, natural way to behave.
I worked for George and Russ, and I think that they liked me and they wanted to find a spot in the film for me. I probably petitioned for that a little bit. Well, I think that the Judy character was pretty much a given, that it would be, I was the one that was going to be playing Judy. It wasn't going to stress me, it wasn't going to be beyond my capabilities. I wouldn't embarrass myself. So that's how it came to be. I didn't read the script. So it was you came in, you saw what was going to happen that day, and there might have been rewrites during the day. George would sit cross-legged with me in the living room, on the floor, and he would talk directly to me and tell me what he thought this character of Judy might be thinking. You know, given her age and her, you know, how naive she was. So that was really very helpful. And of course, I didn't want there to be a lot of retakes just because of the cost of film stock. But of course, there were some. You know, I knew that the body at the top of the stairs was a model of a hobby, from a hobby store with silly putty put over it, and I knew that the actual body was Kyra being moved. So I know I've been asked on many occasions, were you frightened? And no.
I rewrote what he wrote, and then I wrote the whole second half of the script myself. We had some script discussion with a few people, and nobody except me was coming up with ideas, not even George, and I wondered why he wasn't. So George read it and he said, I think there's something the matter with it. Well, I said, I don't think so. George said, here, Rudy, you read it. So Rudy read it and he said, it's fine, there's nothing wrong with it. George thought for a minute or so and he said, I know what it is, it needs one more siege. And what he meant by that is that there should be a point where the ghouls almost break into the house, but maybe 3/4 of the way through the movie, but they don't succeed, and only when the final surge of ghouls happens do they succeed in breaking into the house. in the mid-90s, George was on a TV show with Richard Matheson. He wrote I Am Legend. I had never read I Am Legend, which is a good thing. And George apologized to Matheson for ripping him off. That's why I quit writing, because if he would have said they were vampires, the ripoff would have been apparent. So I unwittingly bailed him out. And, you know, when I came in and said dead people after human flesh, now they were no longer vampires, now we could go ahead with the thing.
I got out of the Navy when I was a young guy, 19 years old, and went back to Pittsburgh, and Russ Striner's brother, Gary, and I went to school together, and he knew I needed some work. George Romero, the producer, he said, let's do a movie, a full-length movie, and it's going to be on a shoestring, but everyone was all up for it. I come out of the bushes, you know, straggling out of the bushes. I'm a zombie, and I start to attack him. He basically grabs me, and then this is where I get a shot, a full-screen mug shot, and that's my 15 minutes of fame right there. We struggle, and he gets me to the ground and beats my brains out basically with a tire iron, and that set the precedent for you gotta kill the brain to kill the zombie. It was just a spectacle that hasn't been seen before.
So this guy, whose arm I was eating, was my real father. So Harry Cooper was played by Carl Hardman, my real father. And so he was fine with my participation. He was the reason I was in the movie in the first place. So
he signed on first.
Yeah, he was one of the producers and an actor, and he did sound effects and that sort of thing too. He had a recording studio in Pittsburgh at the time, so he, you know, contributed sound to the production too. When I was a kid, I'm really old now, but it was when Chiller Theater was on TV on Saturday afternoons. So I think I was about 5 years old when I started watching horror movies, and I was hooked on them. I loved them. And, you know, they weren't like movies are today. I mean, they were much tamer. The Universal classics, you know, Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, The Wolfman, and I loved them. And The Crawling Eye and The Wasp Woman and little
showing those movies today.
Right, yeah, and they were wonderful, and they were kind of like a roller coaster ride for me. So, you know, it was fun. And it was escapism, and I'd laugh and get scared, but you know, it was mostly just really fun. So when I got to play a little monster, I was beside myself with joy. I really was. I was stabbing into a pillow while someone threw black paint at the wall.
And I think it's safe to say that photo of you looking straight into the camera with the tresses over the one eye and the blacked out eye, I think it's fair to say that's an iconic photo. Was that in the movie, or is that a promotion still? Do you remember?
My dad shot it at lunchtime, and I was hungry, so that sort of the pre-eye roll, like, Dad, enough, I'm hungry. You know, so there's nothing more fierce than a hungry 9-year-old girl.
That's the reality of the context. I just noticed a trowel necklace, and I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah. Well, a friend got this for me at an antique shop. These little guys, I make these. I do these in pewter. I cast these myself.
The wave of murder which is sweeping the eastern third of the nation is being committed by creatures who feast upon the flesh of their victims. First eyewitness accounts of this grisly development came from people who were understandably frightened and almost incoherent. Officials and newsmen at first discounted those eyewitness descriptions as being beyond belief. However, the reports persisted. Medical examinations of some of the victims bore out the fact that they had been partially devoured.
I got the role because there was a recording studio and a film house that went together to make Image 10. I was the receptionist for the recording studio. So it was a situation where, you know, most people were asked if they'd like to be in this movie. Well, I was told, that after I was done at the studio, that I could go out the road and be in the movie for another 4 hours. And that's the way I got into it. My moment of glory was after they blew the truck. Well, like you said, if no one's seen the movie, they don't understand. They blew a truck up that had 2 people in it. And after they blew the truck up, the zombies went over and started to pull out sections of people. And
who had been killed in the blast?
Who had been killed in the blast and dismembered. So some people had intestines and some people had livers, and I got a bone. So I get to walk away from this flaming truck with a bone in my mouth, and they had put silly putty on it so that I could grip it, you know, but it was silly putty.
Now that must have felt, I mean, you must have felt pretty special to be one of the ghouls to get to seriously gnaw a bone on camera, because not all of them got to do that. So that was a good way to distinguish yourself. So about how old were you at the time? And
I was 20 years old.
20 years old, and when you told your parents about your involvement in this movie, I bet you explained it to them, and how did they react? Do you remember?
My dad was excited. He was in it.
He was in it too?
He came down on a weekend and did it in the afternoon. He's one of the zombies that they shot. So he had the makeup put on his back that exploded out and that kind of stuff. And my mother, I think, thought that she was too cool for anything like this. She wouldn't have had any interest in it.
Now, Paula, let's talk about your famous shot here, your claim to fame, where you had to get the human remains from the truck that had been blown up. So you're seen in the movie gnawing on a human bone. And it turns out, here we are at this convention in Evans City, and one of the fans brought kind of an artificial bone to suggest, as a gift to you, the remains that you gnawed on. That was over 50 years ago.
55. The people that come are really vested in what this movie was and how they got along with it and how they reacted to it. And we get a lot of gifts that people make, particularly things that people make that they like us to have, little figurines or cards. After a convention like this, we always go home with a few little items that people have dropped off.
Well, they really went out of their way with this artificial bone. They just didn't pull it off the counter, buy it, and bring it in here. In fact, they put it in a special coffin-shaped package. Photo of you, again, from that moment of glory in the movie.
Right. They're amazing. They just really are vested and get a lot of pleasure out of doing this, I think, and they get a lot of pleasure out of giving them to us, too. You know, the accolades that come along with it.
You know, I was the ghoul that got the tire iron in the head. I fight with Ben, and he puts a tire.
You got hit with a tire iron.
Yeah, I also did the Molotov cocktail stunt. Real gasoline, 3 takes, and I just had George and I would set the camera up because we were the camera team. Hardman would make a puddle of gasoline at my feet and a trail of gasoline up my legs and back. And on action, he'd throw a lit match into the puddle and the flames would race up my leg and back. And then I had to stagger like a zombie until I could feel my hair being singed, and then I would fall over a bank where people were waiting with blankets to smother the flames. I didn't get hurt. We pretty carefully worked it out, and I was pretty careful. You know, George said, I said, we're going to look stupid if none of them catch on fire. And then he said, well, we don't have an asbestos suit and we don't have a stuntman. Oh, hell, I'll do it. So I put on heavy denims and a loose-fitting brown suit that I pulled out of the pile of Goodwill clothes that we had there. And figuring that if it was loose-fitting, maybe I could get out of it fast. And that's how we did it.
My brother, obviously Russ Striner, was one of the owners of the Latent Image, which was the parent company to Image 10 that made the film. And I caught the bug years before. He had invited me out to be an extra in Shenley Park, and And I spent a beautiful Saturday day, I believe it was, out there, and I thought, this movie business could be okay. And so I started hanging around with Russ. George was a chain smoker back then, and he used pop bottles as his ashtrays. And you know how disgusting that can be. Yeah. And that was one of my chores, and one of the first ways that I got paid from the Latent Image was I got to take the pop bottles back and make the 2 cents on the bottle. But the problem was, no one would take the bottles with all these cigarette butts in it. So my job was to take the cigarette butts out of the bottles, wash them out. We were a unit, you know. We had, the Latent Image had done tons and tons. By the time we got to Night of the Living Dead, we weren't that naive little group that started back on the South Side. And you know, we had all kind of grown up within that company and and were self-taught movie makers. You know, there's not too many environments you can do that in. You know, usually you're not working if you don't have technical abilities, this, that, or the other thing. But with us, it was much more about what needs done, and we'll figure out how to do it. I think that George had a real natural intuitive for knowing how to make things work. You know, I said for years, I thought George was a more brilliant editor than anything else. George just had such an incredible knack of editing. And so, I wouldn't say we ever did a lot. We did more in commercials, of course, you know, because you have dialogue and so on and so forth, have to hit their mark, and, you know, but George wasn't particularly worried about them hitting their mark if the, you know, content and the action was good in Night of the Living Dead. You would buy a ticket, sit down in a seat, and not know what to expect. I knew everything, what to expect. I knew every cut. In fact, I used to have a lot of fun at drive-ins. I'd sit with the windows rolled down at a drive-in, and before the character said the lines, I would just kind of shout them out. If it hadn't been an independent film, it would have never got made. Hollywood would have never, it just, and if they did somehow greenlight it to be shot, with the first cut, are they gonna be okay with a black man smacking a white girl? We primarily shot it in black and white because of budgetary constraints. For the most of Hollywood, once again, because distributors are all Hollywood or New York, so you finally have to, no matter what, you have to get to that level. They had moved on to color. You know, black and white was, they weren't terribly interested in it. And I think, and finally, Paramount held on to it for a number of weeks, months, trying to make their decision, and then their final decision was to pass because it was in black and white. I don't think Night of the Living Dead would have been Night of the Living Dead if it was shot in color. You know, it gives you all those shadows to hide in, you know, and all those scary points, which, you know, I mean, you look at these photos on the table, this is so in your face, you know. Even these photographs are more mysterious, you know.
For the original Night of the Living Dead, I did the end sequence. Once Dwayne Jones gets shot, everything turns to stills because his life is ended, and that whole sequence is actually animated a frame at a time so we could start and stop on each photo exactly where George wanted. When it came out, it was, first of all, it was kind of a miracle that it was made. You know, it was made in Pittsburgh. I mean, there's tremendously talented people here doing all kind of work, and back then as well. But the idea that you could pull off a feature film locally, I mean, now, you know, look at how many films have come into Pittsburgh over the years. But at that time, it was unheard of. People like to be scared. But more importantly, they like to overcome the fear and overcome the threat. And in most cases, that happens. But George threw a twist to it.
Night of the Living Dead has become its own history unto itself, its own phenomenon. I don't pretend to understand all the reasons why, but people continue to like the story. At conventions, I talk literally. I talk with people who are grandparents standing at my table with people who are teenagers, to people who are 8 and 10 and 12 years old. And the young kids seem to get as much entertainment out of it as their grandparents.
It'll always be home for me here, and I really appreciate everything that goes into the making of one of these conventions. I will also get to see my kids who live in Pittsburgh, so it's a special time. The people that were coming to these conventions are just fans. They're not someone who is going to stalk you or embarrass you or ask you questions that maybe you don't want to answer. No, they're very respectful, very respectful. I couldn't get over that.
What do the fans say to you in general? And I'm sure you've heard them make all kinds of kind remarks to you. They're happy to see you, I know it.
Talk about getting your ego petted. I go home and I don't know how the house.
For a while.
Yeah, they have said things like, "I so believed. I believed you, what you were doing, how you were being, and even though you didn't have much to say in the catatonia state, you still conveyed the fear and the storyline." That is a wonderful compliment. Another is, yours was the first horror film I ever saw, and it made me fall in love with horror. And and other families said, "I've shown it to my son, he's shown it to his grandson." We have generations of family members who have watched the film, and they'll come back and they'll tell me these wonderful stories about seeing it with my grandma. She showed it to me when I was 5.
And that was a pioneering idea back in the 60s. Boy. Of course, nowadays, ghouls and zombies, commonplace. Not
commonplace, then. Not then, not at all. We never knew.
Judith O'Dea, who plays Barbara in the film, they're all such delights. Everyone here is so nice, and it's a very special event because you have the four big stars who are surviving in the cast. Judith O'Dea, Judy Ridley, Russ Striner, and Kyra Sean are all here, and that really makes it special for all of the fans. They're all so memorable. They all have all the fans, I think, are complimentary to them because they love the film so much, and they seem refreshingly surprised by how everyone's still so fascinated by the film, and that everyone is so taken with it, and it's so much a part of everyone's lives, and I think that's just a nice relationship that we have.
Yeah, and it keeps the film alive, it's things like this, events, and it spreads the word for new generations, I think.
I think just her acting, she's so good at acting scared, so good at acting like, how would you be in this situation if the world you knew completely changed overnight? I think she captured that in her fear and detachment. It's probably the most famous movie to ever come out of Pittsburgh.
This is something that just means the world to me and my wife. We both celebrate kind of horror movies and that culture. And she's from Ohio, and believe it or not, so I'm from Michigan. We actually drove down from Michigan for this event to be here because this is freaking awesome. It's amazing. This movie was so important. In undergrad, I wrote a paper on this movie.
No kidding. Yeah. So tell me more about that paper. Very interesting.
So just really exploring, the socio-political, economic implications of what they were trying to do, and then the impact the movie.
And what were they, as far as you're concerned?
Really, kind of the rise of, I would say, really strong capitalism in the United States, and we see this kind of bold move to just almost like a mindless, type of a person, which we saw even more in the mall in Dawn of the Dead, which was like, hey, this is what we're becoming, We
always said it should be a stage play because it's just in the farmhouse for the most part, but it's character driven. It's not quick shots that just 3 seconds. It's like you get to absorb it.
Yeah.
You sit there. There's not a lot of music. It's the dialogue. It's not even about the zombies, honestly. It's like, that's almost like an afterthought.
And it's more about the drama. And yes, it's zombies, and that's all great. And everyone loves the zombies, but it's more about, for me, the interplay between the characters.
Yeah.
And I think it's just expertly done
really a
and
great
shot. And the fact that it's in black and white is not a distraction. It's a bonus. It's a bonus that it's in black and white. Looks beautiful.
Sometimes color is a distraction. It's additional information you don't need.
There's no reason to have it in color. And kids, you should watch it.
That's right.
You should watch it, even though.
Should they avoid the colorized version that's out there, you know?
Avoid it like the plague.
It doesn't even
Please,
exist in our.
don't watch the
doesn't
colorized
exist
version.
in our opinion.
I'm here with my media teacher from Monessen, Mr. Kyle Dobe. He showed us the movie 2 days ago on Thursday. We watched it for the first time. I feel like people like the feel of an apocalypse world, or like a world that has been taken over. It's all about like
dystopian future, maybe.
Yeah, it's all about survival when it comes to those things, and people like that. People like that genre.
We're getting our posters signed for the event, and we came from New York, so we did like a 6-hour drive. I'm sure there's people that have come from even farther too. So it's just a fun way to meet the celebrities and just hang out and fellow fans of the film, and it's just cool, you know. Big horror fans, so it's a natural thing for us, you know.
Now, you're dressed up in character here today. Tell us about the character you selected and why.
I'm Johnny from Night of the Living Dead, the original. He has a relatively short lifespan in that movie, but he's memorable and he kind of looks like me, so it was nice and easy.
Well, you know, no one knows what happens after we die. You can debate this forever, you know, and there's all different levels of it. So it's fun to just make up something new that might happen. You know, what's next? I don't know. And it's an easy monster to create because it's just every man. It's your neighbor. It's the construction worker down the street. They all could just become a zombie at any moment. So it's a movie monster that touches the everyday man. You don't have to go to Transylvania and find some flying bat vampire. It's just like this guy over here running the camera might all of a sudden become a zombie.
Send the wagon through, come directly on over.
Keep those dogs back off of those things.
Move more quickly.